I'm Jim Czek.
And I'm Renee Merrifield.
We're here with Beyond the Ballot. Again, lots to talk about. Big news. The King Charles, delivering the throne speech, the first time since 1977 when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada. Justin was in the audience and wearing some spanky shoes. He's gone from socks to fancy shoes now. He's wearing some kind of green, kind of like Adidas, I think.
Oh, that would be so contrary to the actual dress code of Parliament. Oh, man.
He's causing a buzz for sure with his shoes. Lots of people sharing the picture of the shoes. I mean, I guess he became Prime Minister based on his socks, and now he's graduated to shoes.
Yeah. You know, I feel for Mark Carney a little bit as a new Prime Minister, trying to make his mark, to have the King come. You know, in some ways, some people would say, well, that's a big mark of approval by the King, and that's a huge amount of pomp and ceremony for, to mark the start of his prime ministerial term. But for me, I'm like, wow, you just asked the one that has been groomed since he was born to be king, a true parliamentarian, a true politician, to literally open your parliament and be compared to what you should be. I think that's a difficult act to follow, and I don't know if I would have wanted that if I was Mark Carney.
I think that's why a lot of people don't do it. I think the last time it was done was in 1977 for those exact reasons, right? Because we did it in our meme section, because we do a meme section now in our daily show, and there it was, like the King sitting up higher and then Carney sitting down lower, and then he didn't look very happy as well. I mean, it could have been just the way that picture was captured. But you also watched Carney's first speech and Andrew Scheer's opening speech as well. Maybe share some of what your thoughts on both of those.
I did. So on the very first day, they have to, elect a speaker of the House. And that election happened yesterday. And then both the Prime Minister goes first and welcomes the speaker and talks about, how decorum is going to go and what their hopes are for this session. And then the leader of the opposition gets to do their speech. And I have to say, Andrew Scheer's speech was funny. It was serious. It was compelling. And Mark Carney's was nowhere near that. He's going to have to get up to speed pretty quickly on just how to conduct himself and on how really to command in a way that will draw attention and really move things forward for him.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed in that day was just the dismissal of Melanie Jolie there. I think, they're used to having, I guess maybe even, I don't know, with Justin Trudeau is fairly loose, they're saying too, and with Carney, it's like you be on time, he's not going to suffer fools, I guess is what they're saying, and so you have to actually be on point, and he kind of just waved her away, right?
Carney's an authoritarian. It's his way or the highway. It's what he wants. It's how he wants to do it. I like the decorum that he's bringing in. I like that he's really raising the bar on excellence and how business should be conducted. But I do think that, those little nuanced, movements are going to be caught on video. And he is not used to that. He's used to being behind closed doors in an office space. So it's going to be a different era for him indeed. And, Twitter was a buzz about that gesture and how that affected Melanie's facial expression afterwards. And she tried to turn it back on right away. But it was definitely a snub.
Yeah, it didn't look good. I mean, from just what you see, it didn't look good for sure, right? Especially, Melanie Jolie, who enjoys, I guess, the favor of Justin Trudeau in the past too, right? So.
Well, there was lots of speculation about those two in the past. And what I would say is that, as a new leader comes into a party, there's certainly a lot of posturing that takes place amongst caucus members, a lot of jockeying as to who's in, who's out, who's in the inner circle, who's not. And it's a very difficult season in that leaders um, story, but then also within the caucus. And, this was a little bit about that. She was sitting by herself, really not talking to anyone, went over to at least make small talk with the leader. And then to be dismissed was really, I would say, quite harsh when it comes to that, especially on the public stage which that house is.
Did you catch the throne speech then? Did you watch the full throne speech from King Charles III?
I didn't get to see it all, but I definitely got to see the highlight reel. Certainly, it was usually these speeches are usually written by the Prime Minister's office and then read by the Governor General. This clearly did not have that. It's definitely a case where a lot of the verbiage, a lot of the story was probably directed by King Charles's office and by the UK. I do not see all of that being part of a normal throne speech whatsoever. And I do think that there was a lot more of the king in that speech than what usually is.
Yeah, and he came and he went. He was a quick turnaround for the king, and he's back off to England. And and then Ian said, Ian is from England, and he said that from his viewpoint, that the king doesn't look that well. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting comment. There's been lots of speculation. Obviously, King Charles was very open about his cancer bout, and he has been very public in the last few weeks. So, it is hard. It's a time change. There is so it's not easy to come to a different country for 48 hours and do a speech. So, it might have just been a little bit of fatigue on his part. But I thought he was very eloquent. In his social interactions, he's very natural. He's very fluid. Truly has this ease about him as he's moving through. You saw the swooning over him. The media yesterday was all about interactions and how many people he shook hands with and he talked to, and how easy he was to talk to. That is not how Carney has been described, and so that juxtaposition is going to be a tricky one for him indeed.
Yeah, and then there was a poll that was put out as well, and it showed that 83% of Canadians are really indifferent to the monarchy right now too. So.
Oh, they want cheaper food, and they are desperate to get a break, on their living expenses and their cost of living. The monarch right now is almost irrelevant for them in terms of what it means to their lives on a daily basis. So if this was Carney's way of trying to draw attention to his coronation, quote unquote coronation as prime minister, I think he missed the memo a little bit on that.
Yeah, and then there was that Western Leaders conference just recently in the Yukon, and obviously Danielle Smith wants that pipeline, and in the Northern Gateway pipeline, and EB sounds like there's this National Post piece coming out, and it doesn't sound like the NDP are going to be supportive of that pipeline.
It doesn't really matter what the NDP are supportive of or not. I think what needs to happen is a pipeline. Yeah. And I think he's going to be looking for some really short-term wins. I think that's what Tim Hodgson was put into the ministerial position as. He is a get things done as the former CEO of Goldman Sachs in Canada here. So I do think that this might be done with or without EB's permission, quote unquote, as was the Trans Mountain Pipeline done without Horgan's. And Horgan spent, his tens of millions of dollars of British Columbian taxpayer dollars and ended up with absolutely nothing to show for it. So I don't think that EB is foolish enough to go that same way, but I might be mistaken. Carney's looking for a quick win. This is an easy one to see and to get working on. Certainly, when the economy is in a recession, building a pipeline it's a great time frame to build that pipeline. So, and also it's a good way to show his his allegiance to the West. And I will maybe be a little bit contrary to something you said at the beginning and say that this is Danielle Smith's and the Albertans pipeline. But remember, 80% or just under 80% of Canadians are pro pipeline right now. They
Yeah.
want to see that. And so I think that Carney, regardless of what EB decides, I think that Carney might have to step in on this particular case and make sure that that pipeline goes through, especially as he's looking for quick wins over the next 12 months.
And I think it would go a long way to quell any separatist movement or sovereignty for Alberta to actually get them that pipeline that they need. And the Northern Gateway is the one that makes the most sense because it's the shortest and the quickest one to build, I would say. But the Premier of Manitoba making some noise and says, hey, look to Churchill here. So, at least we have somebody actually asking for something, right? As opposed to, like saying we don't want it, right? So there you go. That's a different thing there. So, and I've worked in Northern Manitoba there, and that would be like a great bonus for Manitoba as well.
Agreed. I mean, right now the provinces are hurting. We're seeing their budgets not balanced. We're seeing deficits like crazy. And one of the things that I've seen a number of different pundits, and it was actually Stephen Pullots that drew my attention to it first, and that was on the a lot of people say, well, this is the total debt of Canada compared to the other OECD countries. What people fail to do is add up the province's debt in addition to Canada's debt. And then you get a very different story when you compare us to the OECD. Very few provincial or state-run governments are actually able to take on debt the way ours are in Canada. And so it's often a mistake that other economists make as they're comparing country to country, and by not adding up the provincial debts. So we have provinces right now that are scrambling to try and find ways that they can balance their budgets or at least get that deficit a little bit less. And I think that we're seeing that across the board, whether it's Manitoba or Alberta.
And there was a time when BC had balanced budgets and surpluses, and Ontario the same. And those are two of the bigger producing provinces, other than Alberta. And here they are both showing a lot of red ink recently. So that's a very key point that you're making.
And when we look at what the GDP is doing right now, I think that new economic figures are posting that we're basically going to be flat this year, maybe up to 0.5. What we need to remember is that the Trans Mountain Pipeline is 0.25 of 0.5 of that GDP right now. It's going at almost 80%. Very, very key piece of infrastructure that is driving any amount of GDP that we have. So, Carney is an economist at his core, and he's going to be looking at where are the quick wins for me to really increase GDP, and that Northern Gateway Pipeline is certainly an area that he could do that.
I did an opinion piece yesterday on Kelowna Now, talking about we have the energy resources, we just don't have the right policies, and that's what we've been talking about, how we need to go from implementing all that energy into our economic assets, as opposed to just all these policies that have kind of been against our economic prosperity.
Yeah, and for EB's comments make no sense. On the one hand, he's passing Bill 14 and 15 in the House, which give him powers and give his cabinet powers to, really go around any sort of environmental process that we've got in place. And on the other hand, he's saying no to the gateway. He passed Bill 7, which gives him powers with respect to interprovincial, taxes and evening out the playing fields, and then says no to the Northern Gateway. He's not making any sense, and he's very disingenuous when it comes to actually getting, big infrastructure projects going. Because if he was serious about that, I think an easy win, not just for economic prosperity, but also for unity, would be if he was the bigger, the bigger person and just said yes to that gateway pipeline.
I think that last point you're making is huge. I think that would quell all that talk if you just get that pipeline in place. Because there is 3 by-elections right now that are going to run in Alberta, and one of them has one of the leaders of this separatist movement going as well, right? That'll be running. And I think it's in the old Stidsbury riding. And then Nishi's running in, I think, the Edmonton, an NDP stronghold. Well, it'd be interesting to see, too, and how NDP does after the federal wipeout of the NDP, really.
Yeah, and I mean, look, watching Dan Davies on the federal stage, I am like this is not a leader that is going to take this party into any sort of relevance.
Yeah.
His comments about the king coming were absolutely brutal. I mean, the Bloc as well. Don't get me wrong. The Bloc is certainly not. I didn't like their stance on. On the king's arrival, but really, Dan Davies just looks weak. He looks like someone kind of flat-footed, and I know that he's the interim leader. He's not the the permanent leader. But when you contrast Andrew Scheer as the interim leader of the opposition right now in the House compared to Dan Davies as the interim leader, there's just no question, as to who's commanding that. So it's a very I'm concerned for the NDP in terms of relevance at all, and whether or not they will fade into oblivion. For Nenshi to then run in Edmonton when he's from Calgary, he was the Calgarian mayor. For him to not even have, the amount of belief that he could run and win in Calgary, I think is very telling. Now, obviously, the riding in Edmonton is a NDP stronghold. It's been NDP as long as I think I can remember.
11 out of 12 last elections. 11 out of 12 last elections. So very strong,
okay.
right?
Yeah. We're talking. So I understand why he's going there, but definitely isn't a huge vote of confidence for where his party is right now.
Yeah, that's why I say it's really interesting to see, because it's like a real stronghold in what that NDP kind of wipeout has done. Because Carney won't even speak to Davies yet, and they're trying to get a bunch of things, and they've been told no. And even Blanchette came out. I was going to play that clip, but I don't think it's necessary. That clip where Blanchette is saying that they get nothing, they don't get to count on committees, they don't have official party status, and then nobody's. I mean, Blanchette definitely not going to be generous at all. Not like Ralph Klein was. I don't know if you remember when Ralph Klein was the premier in Alberta, when I think the NDP was down to one seat or something like that, and he still gave them the ability, and he regretted it, I think, to speak in the House or the Parliament, or legislature, I should say.
Yeah, and it does confuse the legislative process. I will say that, I really found it difficult, even when I was an MLA, to have the Green Party with only 2 members, get as much airtime as they had. It's hard to do it proportionately. It's hard to really govern, and it ends up really skewing the conversation in ways that I don't think are indicative of the electorate or the population. Now, having said that, I think Carney's also been given instructions to not ally with the NDP and not ally with the Bloc, because it's going to weaken him and will eclipse him. They'll be able to take credit for some of what he's going to do. I think it also sets him up and postures him to really have to agree with the Conservatives. And the Conservatives have a much stronger economic agenda than either of the other 2 parties. And so in doing so, I think he's actually saying, and almost deflating some of the Conservative electorate, because if he can convince everyone that he's really the centrist over the next 12 months, I think he'll continue to deflate the Conservative vote.
And that pipeline would go a long way to doing that, I think, because I think that's what everybody's waiting for. Is he going to commit to the pipeline? And you mentioned Hodgson earlier. He's, I would say, one of the most serious guys they've had in the Liberal cabinet in a long, long time. Like, he's a serious guy. And I think Carney's a serious guy, right? Both those 2 guys are more serious than most of the other ones all combined, in my opinion.
And I mean, I have to say, Tim Hodgson, his videos, his tour, going to the different provinces and really meeting with the premiers and meeting with the ministers. I honestly, he has done a fantastic job. You contrast that to a very serious politician in Gregor Robertson, who has done nothing but kind of bumble, and every article that gets written is about him wanting to basically prop up housing prices. I think that there's just truly, I've been shocked at how well Hodgson has done in such a short amount of time.
Well, they're 2 serious guys, and like, if you look at the Liberals for the past 10 years, I don't know if they had anybody that would kind of fit the bill as seriously like that could actually get things done. I mean, that we're early in the game, but I mean, what we need to see is actually a commitment to start building a pipeline.
Yeah, and I think that one of the ones that didn't get the amount of airtime that she should have, and really I think is quite successful and could be quite successful, would be Anita Anand. I don't agree with all of her policies. I don't think that she's necessarily my cup of tea, but I do think she could get more done than what she was given credit for under the Trudeau government. So it'll be interesting to see if she takes a stronger role and more of a lead voice on some of the files that she has and that she's been given to her.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this starts to play out, because the timeline, I think even Danielle Smith, like she's only giving a short leash. Like she wants to see something happen, right? So, and I think even with these by-elections happening, if that guy gets elected, that's actually going to probably fuel more of this separatist movement. And I think they need to kind of quell it by committing to a pipeline for. I mean, it's for the benefit of all of Canada. It's not just for the benefit of Alberta.
No, it is for the benefit of all of Canada. And I think that, Carney does have a very short time frame. He basically has 12 months, 18 months tops to really make, to make some noise. And he's really started flat-footed. When you look at what the media said about him not having a budget and how he was kind of piled upon on that front, I don't think he's got a lot of time. I don't think he's got a lot of leash in terms of missteps. And I think that not having a budget was a misstep. I think he tried to correct on the fly and say, no, we're going to have one this fall, which means that the Legislative Assembly has to be called back at least. What do we say? That they've worked the least amount in any given in 40 years this year. But even that, you look at the parliamentary calendar right now, and it's anemic. I mean, they've got 2 weeks right now and 4 weeks in the fall. 4 weeks is not a long time to get through a budget and to get through budget estimates. So I can't see, getting through committee stage on that in 4 weeks' time. So I don't know if it'll just be like a baby budget or if there'll actually be some rigor attached to it. But if it's a baby budget, there's going to be a lot of conversation around that, because Canadians, I think, deserve much better than what they're receiving right now.
Do you think at this point that Canadians really want to see some action and some wins, actually? Because if you look to the United States, it seems like they get a lot of wins there with a lot more companies looking to invest and stuff like that. And I haven't seen that yet. And we've, like, the NDP and the Liberals have gotten away with just like these platitudes and talking about projects way into the future. Like I look at this one that EB's promoting right now. Experts say linking Yukon and BC power grid's a game changer. I don't know if I see it as a game changer. They're actually running diesel generators up in the Yukon to power for electric vehicles. I mean, not sure how Yukon helps us. Maybe, and how can we sell them a ton of energy when we're buying it from Washington and Alberta? So I don't see the game changer in there.
No, I agree with you, Jim. I think you're bang on. This is we are in an energy deficit. We are not going to make electrification goals. We need not Site C, but we need D, E, F, and G. And there is no way that we're going to spend billions of dollars to link with the Yukon and think that BC is going to be in a net benefit position. I think what we're doing, though, is if we look at it from a global perspective, shifting from diesel to LNG is probably a good thing. Yeah. So, if we create enough electricity with LNG and with water, having the Yukon actually benefit from a more stable electricity, I think is a positive. And so I'm not against linking, but, to say that this is in some way beneficial to and that we have this amazing surplus that we're just going to be selling to the Yukon is absolutely and simply true.
It's like the have-not-enoughs are linking with the have-not-enoughs and saying that the two have-not-enoughs will be enough. I'm just like, the math doesn't work for me. Have-not-enough plus have-not-enough does not equal surplus.
No, I agree. And, it's one thing for Ontario. Ontario creates 65% of all of its electricity through nuclear. So, they have a lot of surplus, and that's why they're selling it to the U.S., and that's where they get it from. What was really interesting is that for the first time, Trump started talking about nuclear this last week, and I think that if you are a country leader and you are not trying to figure out get more power, and it's not even for just the electrification goals and for lowering emissions, it's for AI, it's for technology, it's I think all of the leaders are realizing we are going to get left behind unless we have a much bigger production of electricity. I think that Alberta is trying to do that, and they're going to use natural gas to do it. I think the other provinces have to get on board, but seeing the states talk about nuclear again is pretty radical. But the IPCC documents and reports have been very emphatic. We're not gonna have enough electricity unless we go nuclear.
And I always say, look to the markets for the truth. Look to the markets, because that's where the real truth is. When people can talk nonsense all the time and they can promise these things, but I can tell you right now, if you look to Canada's nuclear stocks or uranium producers, Cameco jumped huge on Trump's news, huge, big jump. And same thing as a like a one that's in exploration turning into producers, Denison Minerals out of Saskatchewan as well, big jump in the stock price. So the uranium stocks in Canada reacting very positive to Trump's news, and we need something similar to that here, because Canada developed a lot of this technology, SMRs.
Yes, and we also in BC, a little known fact, have one of the largest uranium veins existing up in the north of any of the provinces. We also have this very rare opportunity vein to use it as storage of used nuclear products once they're needing disposal. We can actually put them back into the ground. So we have this really rare opportunity, but we all need the laws changed in order for that to happen, because we have the prohibition on uranium production and mining right now that would have to change very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's Denison Mine, sorry, but DML if you're looking for it on the stock exchange, and CCO for Cameco. Cameco, one of Canada's bigger companies as well, well known around the world as a supplier, and they have operations all around the world too. Another one of Canada's greats, Cameco. Yeah, uranium and mining and nuclear energy is, the needs of AI are huge for energy. I mean, you listen to all these people building AI centers in the United States. Now you're hearing they're building them in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all these places. All of them are going to be huge energy pigs, you can say. Like, they need a ton of energy, right? So if Canada wants to be part of that, I know that Kevin O'Leary has been talking about building a LNG-powered AI center in the north of Alberta, because you get the benefits of the cold weather to cool down these supercomputers, because they generate a ton of heat. And so that's a project that he's trying to put together. I know he's always trying to fundraise billions and billions of dollars for that.
And there is a race. There is a race actually to quantum computing, where we can hopefully lessen to some extent the need of that power. And but these supercomputers I think are going to keep requiring more and more power. We need to get on some form of bandwagon that's going to increase our power capacity, and certainly partnering with the Yukon. While it might give a more stable supply to the Yukon, it's certainly not for us here in BC.
Yeah, I mean, power, energy is something that is so important to everything we do. I mean, that is like, we've been taxing energy like it's like a luxury here in Canada with carbon taxes and that, instead of recognizing that it's an essential energy or a component to economic growth and even prosperity and even basic survival.
Yeah, cheap energy is the key to prosperity, 100%. And if we don't have it and another country does, they will be more prosperous than us. Down. And we, it's a little bit scary that we're focused on that.
Starship launches tonight. That'll be their ninth flight. It's their ninth test flight for the big Starship. And there's talk about how that could be one of the ways to transport goods across the world cheaply and efficiently and very quickly, because once you break the atmosphere, you're traveling at Mach 10 with really no energy.
Yeah.
Crazy world.
Yeah, that is a crazy world. And I think it's a little bit ahead of our time right now. Will it happen in our lifetime? Probably, maybe. But is it going to happen right now? There's a lot of things that would have to have to come into play before that would be a possibility. But is going to continue to move on, and we need to get with the times and not fight like we are with our elections and with our lack of energy.
I think we all recognize, or at least you and I recognize, that energy is our so-called biggest asset we have, and that it's time to put it into play.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And we've got, we have what the world wants in terms of energy. We have all of the natural resources that could bring the world's emissions down and could actually propel Canadians' prosperity forward. It makes no sense. My mind is just boggled to not understand why we are not jumping on that bandwagon and trying to move that dial forward.
Well, if you look at that example, Trump announces an investment into nuclear, and I think he wants 10 SMRs going like right away. I don't know the timeline, but they're in different stages. And I think Microsoft is going to restart 3 Mile Island. That was said a while ago. So nuclear energy becoming a real big part of the United States. But again, look at the Canadian stocks that are involved in that industry. They've jumped 10, 15, 20% already. And that's good news for the miners here in Canada.
Yeah, and imagine if that was our uranium mine here in BC. Imagine if that was our prosperity, and imagine if that was our government saying we're going to do SMRs for all large industry that's out in the, in the northern regions. Imagine if that was, what propelled our LNG. Those emission numbers would plummet compared to what they are today. There is so much that could be done. And, I think back to when my son said to me, Ma, like we could totally solve all of the environmental crises that we see today. It's just about political will and money. So yeah, I think we're there.
I think to recap for British Columbia, our strengths, like forestry, and it's in rough shape. I know they struck this committee, and I've talked about it, but our forestry industry, tough shape. They don't have the right people at the table, I don't think, to talk about a path forward. And then mining, uranium is such a key component for nuclear energy, and BC has an anti-nuclear stance. And so that kiboshes that, although again, BC is rich in uranium and in mines, that kind of kiboshes that. And mining, our next biggest industry, or I guess might even be the first one now, 20 years to get a mine going. It's really, really tough to tap our natural wealth here in British Columbia right now with the way the government's operating.
Yeah, and then, we have opportunities like the Northern Gateway pipeline that could easily be turned into a mega project, and that's what EB says no to. Like, it makes no sense.
The easier phone call was like, listen, Danielle, we can do it. It's at 10% off the top. Right?
Totally.
That's it. Done deal. Sign the paper tomorrow. 10% off the top.
The only reason that we are not in worse financial shape is because of the LNG and what it gives to the Canadian or to the British Columbian budget. Take a look at what we do and how we profit from it. So I mean, it's not magic. It's just economics in terms of actually driving prosperity for British Columbians forward.
And then also take that we have one of the biggest gems in Canada too is our port in Vancouver, but then build a port. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Really advance that port up there too as well to make that just like a huge hub. And then, British Columbia could be seen as the economic engine to the east, right? And,
totally. And then once again, look at that Terminal 2 for the Port of Vancouver. It has literally taken 20 years through an environmental process to approve. And that is owned by the federal government. Like, the port is literally a federal jurisdiction. And we cannot get a port approved in 20 years. Like that, just for an expansion of the
everything
terminal.
Is stuck. Everything it just seems to be stuck in regulation. And again, to reiterate that message, the lure of large capital is to the United States because they say less regulation, less taxation, and fast tracking of projects.
We came out with numbers this morning that private investment is down, and I'm like, it's not magic that we don't have that are thriving under this bureaucratic environment. It's simply just not there. And exactly how Carney is going to fix that in 12 to 18 months, but I want to see him try because we are desperate for some new investment here in Canada.
I think we have to believe that he's going to do the right thing for Canada, because I mean that's the only way to get a path forward.
True. Can I gap on us just a little bit
Sure,
and talk
you
about
bet.
one thing? We might have already talked about this on other shows, so if you have, just stop me in my tracks. But I was at the hospital yesterday, not for myself. I'm doing great, so thanks for all the concerned listeners out there. But I was at the hospital talking with some of the staff, and honestly, they are so at that hospital. There was this like kind of dialogue about pediatrics being shut down for the next 6 weeks. Sitting there in the ER, I literally am looking around and I can see 4 kids, in that given moment, waiting to be, and knowing that if they admitted, they would be admitted either to Kamloops or to Vancouver. This is a tragedy and is completely atrocious, and I can't believe that kids are not more upset about our ERs closing and our pediatric wards closing. This is a regional hospital and we do not have enough pediatricians to keep it open. Something is terribly wrong, and it is an absolute tragedy that we are not more upset about what we are getting for our tax dollars.
There is a doctor out there on Instagram here in Kelowna that has raised that same point, and we've reached out to her to see if we can get her in for an interview. So she's saying people should be screaming about this, just like you just said, that this is not acceptable here in a regional hospital. So.
No, and I was just told that biopsies, for livers are 4-month wait. Imagine that, like, you don't know if you have cancer for 4 months waiting for a biopsy. That is just mind blowing, because liver biopsies are some of the top priorities in terms of emergent care. So, I think that we need to be way more loud about what is happening and about how it's happening. And we need to get started. I did just order Dr. Brian Day's new book, so I'm looking forward to reading it and looking at all of his statistics, et on the state of healthcare here in Canada. But truly, we in Kelowna deserve better. We in the region deserve better, and and we need to get pretty loud about it. Because if I was a parent of young kids right now, I'd be pretty concerned.
I was just in California and I was speaking to a doctor. We attended a longevity conference there, and speaking with a surgeon, I think out of Florida. And I said, "Oh, you guys got free healthcare up there?" And I said, "Well, it's free if you can access it. It's just that the problem is accessing it." And I shared one of the stories of the young lady. We did a story on her. About she having a brain tumor, and I think it was 9 months her wait. And he said, that's a death sentence. She needs to leave right now. She needs to come here and she needs to get it looked at right now. And that's the if you don't have the money to go to the United States or something like that, that's not a great place to be, right? So.
And that's Brian Day's point. Dr. Brian Day basically said people are dying on wait lists, and we need to figure out a better system. And I'm of the mind, do we care how people get health care? I think that the public, I like our public system. I think it should be public pay, but I don't think it matters whether it's publicly provided or privately provided. I think that we need to start looking at who can do it most efficiently, who can do it for the least money, who's more outcomes based, and how do we get the most amount of people treated. I know that I've said it before, but I'm watching with really big curiosity, Danielle Smith and them reform the Alberta healthcare system, because they are moving to an outcomes-based system where, the money follows the patient and the hospitals don't get paid until that patient receives treatment.
Yeah, and I think that, in Canada, I think a lot of the politicians, especially the left, have gotten to this thing where everything's politically motivated, and they think that they're going to lure doctors and nurses and that to Canada because they hate Donald Trump, as opposed to, like half the wages and double the taxation, and that. Those are the real things that people put on the kitchen table, but they think it's all about politics. The same thing Melanie Jolie said the other day. Oh, everybody's mad about Harvard. We'll just move the hall of Harvard up here, and we'll get the best and the brightest from Harvard to come work. They're not going to come for a third of the salaries, the third of the opportunities, and double the taxation. Just like they think it's all politics. It's about the economy. I mean, I don't know how many we can say that. It's about the economy, stupid. Like, we need to give them incentive to come here. It's the same thing as our military. We can't get people to join our military because we underpay them, under-equip them, and then we don't even pay them the respect they deserve.
Yeah, I have a family member that is trained in a surgical specialty in the States, and conversations with him when asked about whether he's coming back to Canada or not, he's like, I can make in 4 days the amount of money that I would make in 20 days in Canada.
Yeah.
Like that, there's just no comparison. And it's not just about money. It's also about the state of the healthcare system. They, healthcare professionals go in to these careers to save lives. And when you are constantly working against all odds to even get people treatment and to get people care, I remember talking to, when I was still an MLA, I remember talking to a physician that was in one of the hospitals in Victoria. And, this physician looked at me and said, I want the Minister of Health to come into the hospital just one day. I want them to do my rotations with me and tell all of these patients that they have cancer and that they are not going to be seen in time. I want him to do that job just for one day. And, I look at that and I think to myself, that is the frustration that these healthcare professionals feel. That is the frustrations and the stress that the nurses are under, because they know that better treatment is possible and they simply cannot access it for the patients that they are serving. And I think that, it's, those physicians and those surgeons and those nurses in the States are there because they have amazing facilities that, and I don't want a US system. I think that there's better out there. I think we could follow a Swedish system. I think we could follow a German system. I think we could follow the Denmark system. I think there's a lot of different systems that we could be emulating, i.e. all of the ones that are better than us and all of the ones that still have socialized healthcare, but honestly have beautiful facilities and have facilities that are treating patients with far better outcomes than what's possible here in Canada.
Yeah, I do think like a lot of our politicians need that reality check. Even our BC government right now is spending advertising dollars trying to convince nurses and doctors to move to British Columbia from the United States. I just don't think the people there are really involved in politics as much as they think. They think there's this huge anti-Trump. I was just there. Nobody really talks about it, right? Like whether they like them or not. I was in California. They're just going about their lives, right? They're not. And then so you're trying to convince them that everything's politically motivated when it's not. And if you look at it, the results are different. If you look at some of our best and brightest, even Mark Carney's moved his company to New York. His wife works in New York. Mike Myers works in New York. Ryan Reynolds, you know what I mean? All our best and brightest are in the United States. Even our hockey players, lots of them choose, or they get their salary kind of like matched to a U.S. salary and stuff like that. So we need to think about economics. It's not all politically motivated like a lot of the Liberals and NDP think.
Yes, you could talk about industry too. Our tech companies, our forestry companies, our best and brightest are literally leaving Canada because there is a better opportunity that is in a different economic vibrancy. And, I encourage, I don't say go to the States because I know we're not supposed to go to the States right now, but honestly, get into other economies and just feel the difference. I was talking on the airplane this morning about, to the passenger next to me, just about our airplane system and how frustrating it is to fly into YVR right now because of their flow system and their lack of air traffic controllers. And I said, yeah, and then you get to Europe and everything runs like clockwork. It's like, what are we doing here that is just not measuring up? We just really need a different productivity standard, and we need a different standard of living in direct result of that productivity.
I don't want to sound negative all the time, but our asset, our strength that they can't take away from us, it's the stuff beneath our feet. And that's the stuff, that's our anchor. That's the stuff they have to come and get. They have to come and get the uranium out of Saskatchewan. And it would be great if they got it out of British Columbia every now and then. Our LNG, our oil and gas, and all the gold and silver and copper and all those things that we have in our ground that they have to come here to get. That's our strength. That's what we should be focused on, because we can't compete on many of the other things, right? But then we can use that money to kind of increase our competitiveness in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Jim. You and I are on the same page on that one. And it'll be really interesting to see what Prime Minister Carney does with this one.
Maybe you and I can phone him up and we can be his advisors or something. Or maybe he can watch the show like Chrystia Freeland watches it on a regular basis.
Quite possibly. Quite
There you
possibly.
go. Anything else you want to add today?
No, just it doesn't have to be negative, but I do think that continually drawing attention to a positive trajectory is a good
Yeah.
thing, and I think that that's what we're trying to do today.
All right. Thank you, Renee, and enjoy Vancouver. And we'll see you when you're back in this central Okanagan here. Enjoy your day,
Okay.
and thank you for watching Now Media.